week 1, day 5, Job and Babel. I'm going to need you to hang with me here as we take a little detour. Up to this point, we've been in Genesis, and now we're going to hop over to the 18th book of the Bible, because we know based on the language and some of the cues in that book that it was written about the time after the flood. It just appears a little bit later. So that book is called Job, and it looks and spelled like Job, J-O-B, but it's pronounced Job. And this book is by far one of the hardest books in the Bible for me to wrap my mind around, and I think a lot of people have the same issue that I do with it. And essentially, it's just results of the fall. And so, in a nutshell, it's about a very faithful man of God named Job, and for 41 chapters in this book, we hear about tremendous suffering on his part. He loses his wealth, he loses his health, his children die, and all the while, everyone in his life is questioning why he would still worship and believe in a God who would allow this to happen to him. But Job remains faithful, and in the end, in chapter 42, verse 10, we learn that the Lord makes Job prosperous again and gave him twice as much as he had before. But we're still left to sort of reconcile the suffering that Job went through. And so we realize that we live in a broken world, and sometimes good and faithful people suffer. And we have to realize that at some levels, God allows this to happen. And so we kind of wrestle with this, but ultimately we're going to learn that God allows his own son to suffer immensely for us. And we'll talk about that more later. But we hope that you'll come to the understanding that God is good, even through suffering and through things that happen that we can't understand. God is still good. And so now we're going to jump back to Genesis chapter 11. And so Noah's family has populated the earth, and they are living in one central area, and they're speaking one language, and they start to become selfish. And so in chapter 11 of Genesis, in verse 4, they say, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered all over the face of the earth." Well, as you can imagine, God doesn't like this. He wants to be glorified, and these people are trying to glorify themselves. And so that's exactly what God does. He confuses their language, and he scatters them all over the earth. And that's where we're going to end today. Thanks for hanging with us.